The first sound was not hoofbeats. It was the horn. A low, mournful cry rolled across the gorge, carried by the wind until the walls of Helm's Deep hummed with it. It was not an Orcish signal, nor the brass of men. It was older, heavier, born of bone hollowed by fire and polished by plain storms. The sentries on the rampart froze, listening, because sound like that did not belong to stone fortresses. It belonged to riders who never slept under roofs. Then came the thrum of earth beneath the walls. Not thunder. Not storm. The rhythm of many hooves, hammering in perfect cadence, shaking loose dust from mortar seams. One torch fell from a guard's trembling hand and sputtered on the stones. "They've come," whispered the watch captain, voice tight as a bowstring. Out of the dark valley mist, shapes emerged, a half-shadow, half-myth. Tall torsos above broad equine flanks, manes braided with bronze rings, eyes catching firelight like wet obsidian. Centaurs. They moved in formation so precise it looked like the turning of gears, yet each carried the untamed air of storms breaking over open steppe. At their head rode a woman taller than any man on the wall. Her shoulders bore a cloak of black horsehair, her bow slung across her back like a second spine. Captain Lyra. Her gaze climbed the ramparts without hesitation, fixing on the fortress commander waiting above her. She did not raise a hand in greeting. She did not smile. She only looked, as if the stone itself had called her here. Inside the keep, whispers stirred. Children pressed to arrow slits for a glimpse of the riders, their small faces pale lanterns in the torchlight. Mothers pulled them back, muttering prayers. No one cheered. No one dared. Centaurs were oathkin, yes, but also legends. Legends arrive only when death is already near. Commander Dern descended from the battlement, iron greaves striking sparks as he walked to the gate. His beard was streaked with ash gray, his eyes hollow from nights without rest. Yet when the gate opened and he stepped onto the frost-stung earth to meet Lyra, he straightened, shoulders square, hand firm on his sword hilt. "You ride late," he said, voice steady though the wind tried to take it. "We ride when the plane tells us," Lyra replied. Her words carried no apology, only fact. "And the plane told us the night would be red." For a long breath, silence. Just the groan of timbers, the huff of centaur breath, and the hiss of the torches. Dern studied her, wondering if she was speaking of prophecy or of intelligence. Perhaps both. Behind Lyra, a younger centaur shifted restlessly, the point of his spear catching light. Miran, barely past youth, restless with the hunger of proving. His eyes darted toward the mountains, as if expecting the enemy to come spilling down already. Lyra flicked her ear toward him in quiet rebuke, and he stilled, though the impatience still quivered in his flanks. Dern motioned toward the fortress. "You'll find no open ground here. Stone walls. Narrow ways. Men fight like roots in the earth. Your kind," he trailed off, eyes flicking to her equine form. "Your kind prefers the sky above you." Lyra's mouth twitched, whether at insult or simple truth, no one could tell. "Tonight we prefer survival," she said. The words fell heavier than the horn. They hung between them, binding commander and captain alike. From the heights of the wall, another sound rose, the distant scrape of metal, faint but unmistakable. Orcish forges at work in the dark. The wind carried it like an omen, a whisper of chains dragged across stone. A murmur rippled through the men on the ramparts. Dern turned his head toward the sound and swore under his breath. The orcs were closer than he had hoped. Lyra lifted her chin, nostrils flaring. She could smell it too, the bitter smoke of pitch, the sweat stink of beasts bred for war. She did not ask if Dern was ready. She did not ask if the walls would hold. Instead, she spoke to the centaurs at her back, her voice carrying across the keep with the weight of command. "Form circles. 2 ranks. Keep the bows unstrung until I give the word." The riders obeyed, splitting with the silent efficiency of waves dividing around a rock. Their movement unsettled the human soldiers. Even discipline looked like wildness when it came from creatures not bound by stone. Dern watched, jaw tight. "Your circles will mean little when ladders touch the wall." Lyra's eyes cut to him, sharp as an arrow's edge. "And your walls will mean nothing if their engines light the gate." Trust our hooves as you trust your stones. The words might have sparked fury, but instead they cracked something older, the uneasy gap between their worlds. Both leaders knew the truth, neither stones nor hooves would be enough alone. The battle ahead demanded both. A child's cry broke the silence from within the keep, quickly hushed by a mother's hand. Lyra turned toward the sound, her expression unreadable. Perhaps it was there, in that cry, that she found the weight of her oath renewed. The horn sounded again, deeper this time, rolling over stone and valley alike. Helm's deep shivered, as if remembering its own name. The night had found its guardians. And the enemy was already moving. The fortress was never silent, even in waiting. Helm's deep exhaled in groans of timber and the drip of condensation sliding down cold stone. Men muttered on the walls, the scrape of whetstones whispering like teeth against steel. Horses shifted nervously in the stables. Yet beneath all those familiar sounds ran something deeper, an unease that was not born of stone, but of the guests who had just ridden through its gates. The Centaurs moved differently from soldiers. Men filed into ordered rows, voices hushed in ritual discipline. The riders of the plains flowed like a river bending around rock, no formation quite the same twice. Their campfires crackled low, arranged in spirals rather than straight lines. Children peered from doorways, whispering about the strange creatures who ate while standing, who polished weapons with hooves anchored firmly on stone as though the ground itself resisted them. Commander Dern walked among them, helm tucked under one arm. He studied their strange patterns with a soldier's eye, searching for weaknesses, but what unsettled him more was their silence. They did not boast, did not pray aloud, did not call to one another as men would before battle. They simply moved, fluid, watchful, unreadable. Captain Lyra stood apart, near the base of the wall. Her bow was unstrung, yet she carried herself like the string had already been drawn. She watched the sky as if it might offer her counsel. When Dern approached, she did not turn her head, but her ear flicked, an animal gesture she could not hide. "You have fought them before," Dern said. It was not a question. Too many times. Her voice was low, meant for him alone. But never at a wall like this. My kind fights on plains. We strike like storm and vanish into wind. To be locked behind stone, she let the thought hang unfinished, heavy. Dern's joy tightened. Behind these stones, 10,000 have lived when the open fields would have swallowed them whole. Lyra's eyes finally met his, dark and unreadable. And how many have died waiting for walls to fall? For a heartbeat, their gazes clashed like blades. Yet before sharpness could become wound, another voice cut through the air. "Engines," said Miran, breathless from his sprint up the slope. His young chest heaved, spear clutched tight. I scouted to the north ridge. The orcs dragged towers with iron wheels. Ropes thicker than my arm. And something else, something cloaked in tar. I do not know its shape, but it stinks of fire. Murmurs rose. Men paled. Siege engines meant the walls themselves were targets. Dern grunted, as though struck in the stomach. Damn them. They come prepared. Lyra placed a hand on Miran's shoulder. His trembling eased at her touch, though pride still flickered in his eyes at being the first to bring news. She turned back to Dern. Engines mean they expect a siege. And sieges are not won by stone. They're won by endurance, by food, by the will of those within. And what of those without? Dern countered. What of your riders who cannot climb battlements? How long before their hooves itch for the fields they cannot reach? Lyra's jaw worked, but no answer came. Her silence said more than words. She knew her warriors strained against the thought of being trapped. That silence stretched until another voice cracked it, the shrill cry of a child. A boy no older than 7, standing in a doorway clutching a wooden sword. His eyes were round with terror, fixed not on the centaurs, but on the horizon where faint red glows pulsed like veins of fire beneath the mountains. His mother dragged him back inside, whispering prayers too soft to catch. Every soldier on the wall felt the weight of that look. Every centaur caught it, too. Fear, raw and unhidden. Lyra exhaled, sharp. If we do nothing, their fear will break them before the orcs do. Dern narrowed his eyes. And if we ride out, the engines will tear us apart. Not if we strike before they root their wheels. Her words fell like flint on dry grass. A dangerous idea, spoken aloud for the first time. Centaur riders stirred, manes flicking, hooves scraping against stone. They wanted it. They longed for it. A chance to fight on open ground, to taste freedom even in battle. Dern shook his head. A sortie in the dark? You'd gamble the keep itself on a raid. And you'd gamble it on waiting? Lyra shot back. The plane has its voice, Commander. Tonight it screams for action. For a moment it seemed they would quarrel until dawn. But then the sound came again, the faint groan of wood, carried on the wind. Orcish machines dragging themselves closer. No imagination could mistake it. The enemy was moving. Both leaders fell silent. Both knew what it meant. The keep shivered, stone to marrow. Lyra turned to her riders. Sharpen your arrows. Oil your hooves. Tonight we decide whether we are stone or storm. The centaurs moved as one, ripple of readiness passing through them. Dern said nothing, but his hand gripped the reliquary helm at his belt as though it might anchor him. His eyes, however, betrayed what his lips would not, fear that the night was already lost. Above them, the moon slipped behind a cloud. The gorge darkened. The siege had not begun, yet already the air reeked of war. The night grew heavy, the kind that pressed on lungs and dulled the ears. The fortress held its breath. Dern stood atop the wall, cloak pulled tight, eyes fixed on the shadowed valley below. He had known sieges before. He had seen fire rolled against gates, ladders scraping like claws against stone. Yet something in this darkness unsettled him more than any past memory. It was not just the size of the army gathering, it was the silence. Orcs were creatures of chaos, loud in their hate. But tonight they moved like hunters, waiting. Beside him, Lyra paced, hoofs clinking against stone, every muscle twitching for release. Her riders clustered below, restless, stamping the ground in rhythms that sounded like distant thunder. Then it came, a horn blast, guttural and cruel, echoing through the gorge. The first tower appeared from the mist, wheels groaning under its monstrous weight. Then another. And behind them, lines of orcs dragging something vast beneath tarps soaked with pitch. Even from the wall, the stench was unbearable, acrid and sharp, as though the mountain itself had begun to bleed fire. Miran, standing close, gagged but did not turn away. His knuckles whitened on his spear. "It is no ordinary engine," he whispered. Lyra's ears flattened. "They have forged something new. Something born of fire and shadow both." The words were scarcely out when the tarp slipped. And for the first time, the defenders of Helm's Deep saw it. A beast of iron, crawling on wheels that bit into stone. Its frame was built like a battering ram, but its maw glowed with the pulse of molten flame, as if the heart of a volcano had been chained within it. Chains rattled across its body, etched with runes that writhed like living things. It was not merely built. It was bound. The silence on the wall shattered into cries of fear. Dern's throat tightened. "What sorcery? A forged demon," Lyra spat, voice cutting through the din, "not beast, not machine. A prison of fire." And then the demon roared. A blast of heat struck the wall, forcing men to shield their faces. The ground quivered beneath the fortress, stones humming like plucked strings. The Orcish army bellowed as one, the gorge filling with sound so vast it seemed the mountain itself joined in chorus. Miran staggered back, eyes wide with terror. No wall can withstand that. Dern wanted to deny it. He wanted to anchor his men in certainty. But the truth was undeniable. If that thing reached the gates, Helm's Deep would burn. And in that moment, Lyra moved. She turned to her riders, voice sharp as steel. "We ride." Her words struck the garrison like lightning. Men gasped. Dern rounded on her. "You'll be slaughtered. The plane is crawling with them." "Better the plane than the pyre," Lyra answered. Her hand shot toward the valley. "That creature must be broken before it reaches us. Your stone cannot stop it. But hooves can." The centaurs roared their assent, stamping until sparks leapt from the cobbles. Dern's jaw locked. Every instinct screamed to forbid it. But even as he opened his mouth to argue, a worse sound split the air, the crack of stone giving way. The wall beneath them trembled. Mortar dust fell like ash. The forged demon had not yet touched the fortress, yet already its heat was splitting rock. Lyra's eyes burned into his. "Commander, your walls will not hold. Trust me, or bury your people alive." The weight of command settled like a millstone on Durn's shoulders. He saw his men, pale and trembling. He saw the boy from before, peeking from a doorway, clutching his wooden sword. He saw Miran, spear shaking, not from cowardice, but from knowing no human strike could pierce that iron beast. And in that instant, Durn understood. This was no siege of walls. It was a battle for trust. He shut his eyes, then opened them with grim resolve. "Go. Ride. Take every arrow and flame we have. Break it before it breaks us." The fortress erupted in motion. Men scrambled to haul barrels of pitch, torches, ropes. Centaurs surged toward the gates, bows strung, manes whipping like banners. Lyra vaulted onto the wall, silhouetted against the red glow, her voice carrying like a clarion. "Tonight, stone will stand because storm will ride." The gates shuddered open. The centaurs thundered out, their hooves pounding a rhythm older than walls, older than orcs, older than fear. Lyra led them into the night, straight toward the beast that burned like a fallen star. And as the gates closed again, sealing the men within, Durn whispered to himself, not as commander, but as man, "May the wind carry them home." The plain exploded with war. The valley was no longer silent. It throbbed with the thunder of hooves and the hiss of iron wheels grinding against stone. The centaurs surged into the dark, a river of muscle and steel, their shadows torn into fragments by the glow of the forged demon ahead. Each beat of their gallop shook the ground, a promise and a warning. From the wall, the men of Helm's Deep watched in awe. To see centaurs charge was to see the earth itself rebel against fire. Their manes streamed like banners, their bows lifted as one, moonlight catching on arrowheads slicked with pitch. Yet all alone could not quench fear. Durn's hands clenched the battlement so hard the stone cut his skin. Every instinct in him cried to stand with them, to not let the fortress hide him while others bore the brunt. But he knew if the gates opened again too soon, if men rushed blindly into the plain, both armies would be crushed together. The walls were their last anchor, fragile though they felt. Beside him, Miran trembled, not with fear this time, but with restless desperation. "They will die," the boy said, voice tight. "If we do nothing, they will die." "They know the cost," Durn replied, harsher than intended. "They ride so you may live." Miran's jaw worked, a silent protest caught between obedience and the wild spark of youth. His spear quivered like it longed to be thrown, though the enemy was far beyond reach. On the plain, Lyra's voice rose above the thunder. "Flame to your arrows. Aim for the beast's breath." Riders dipped their shafts into torches strapped to their backs, sparks trailing like comet tails as they notched and drew. The first volley arced high, fiery streaks slicing through night. They struck the forged demon's frame with ringing clangs, flames licking but not biting. The beast roared again, a furnace scream that turned breath to ash. Chains rattled, runes flared red, and the heat it exhaled lit the battlefield as if dawn had come early. Some arrows splintered. Others embedded but fizzled. The centaurs wheeled, loosing volley after volley, their circle tightening around the demon like a noose. Yet for every shaft that struck, a dozen more fell harmless, their flames snuffed by sheer heat. Durn's heart pounded against his ribs. He could see it, the effort, the bravery, the futility. "It will not fall to arrows alone," he muttered. Miran heard. His eyes widened. "Then what will bring it down?" Durn did not answer. He didn't know. Below, the centaurs pressed harder. Lyra drew her bow, her arms steady though the air wavered like a mirage. She loosed, her arrow sliced through a seam in the demon's plating, embedding near the glowing maw. A jet of sparks burst outward, a scream like tortured iron echoing across the gorge. For an instant, hope flared. Again, she shouted, "Strike the seams." The riders obeyed, arrows hailing down with renewed fury. Flames clung longer, smoke coiled from the beast's sides. But with every wound it took, its rage deepened. The runes across its chains flared blinding white, and suddenly the machine lurched forward with terrifying speed. The plain trembled. The demon was no longer creeping, it was charging. Panic rippled through the riders. Their circle broke, some veering too wide, others too close. An Orcish war cry surged from the dark, and suddenly the plain boiled with movement. Thousands of orcs, hidden until now, surged forward in a black tide, their spears catching the firelight. From the wall, the men gasped. Helm's Deep felt suddenly very small. Durin slammed a fist against stone. Damn it all, this was their plan. The demon is not the weapon. It is the lure. The truth struck like cold steel. The centaurs had been baited, pulled into the open where the horde could swallow them. Miran's face went pale. We must open the gates, send men to aid them. And leave the fortress naked? Durin snapped. If the gates fall, every soul here dies. His words were iron, but inside, his chest burned. He watched Lyra will her riders, trying to rally them as the tide closed. Their courage had not faltered, but their numbers were few, their space shrinking. Even a storm could drown in a sea that vast. For the first time, doubt crept into Lyra's voice as it carried across the plain. Hold together. Do not break. The orcs howled louder, surrounding them, driving them toward the glowing maw of the forged demon. On the wall, Durin felt helpless, and it tore at him. He was commander, yet his command could do nothing to save those who had trusted him. His eyes flicked to Miran, the boy's hands clenched white around his spear, eyes bright not with fear but with the desperate spark of defiance. And in that spark, Durin saw a reflection of himself long buried, the soldier before the commander. The man who once leapt into battle, heart first, because something within him could not bear to stand idle while others bled. The weight of the helm at his side seemed heavier than stone. He lifted it slowly, almost reverently. His voice was a whisper, yet Miran heard it. Perhaps stone must ride as well. Miran's breath caught. Commander. But Durin said no more. His gaze was fixed on the plain, where Lyra and her riders faced a doom greater than fire. The climax was no longer coming. It was already here, pressing in, demanding a choice. And the walls of Helm's Deep seemed to lean forward, waiting to see if their master would remain stone or become storm. The gates of Helm's Deep shuddered. Durin stood before them, helm under his arm, while the fortress roared with argument. Officers pleaded restraint. Priests begged him to stay within the walls. But their voices were nothing compared to the cries rising from the valley, the clash of iron, the desperate screams of centaurs hemmed in by the flood of orcs. Lyra's voice carried faint but fierce, a silver thread woven through the chaos. Hold the line. Hooves together, be the wind, be the storm. Yet Durin knew even storms broke when drowned in oceans of flame. He placed the helm upon his head. The reliquary's weight pressed into his skull, cold as burial stone. It was not a crown, it was a burden, forged from the bones of commanders before him. And in that crushing silence beneath steel, one thought blazed: if stone does not ride, all is ash. He raised his hand. The gatekeepers froze, stunned. Commander, one whispered. Open them, Durin said, voice steady as iron. Tonight, stone rides with storm. The words spread like wildfire. Murmurs became shouts. Soldiers who moments before clung to safety now clamored for arms, for spears, for horses they did not have. Even Miran, trembling with youth, stood taller, his eyes alight with something fierce. The gates groaned open. The defenders of Helm's Deep surged forth, not in ordered lines, but in a torrent of raw defiance. Durin led them, his blade catching the firelight, his bannerless helm shining with the glow of burning sky. Miran was at his side, spear lowered, too young yet too unwilling to remain behind. They crashed into the valley like a river bursting its dam. Centaurs, staggering against the tide of orcs, saw the impossible sight, men pouring from the fortress instead of hiding behind it. Lyra's head snapped toward the surge, disbelief in her eyes before it turned into something wilder, hope sharpened into fury. Together, she roared. Stone and storm. The battlefield answered. For the first time, orcs faltered. Their tide had expected prey cornered in stone, not a pack of wolves leaping into the night. Spears met hooves, arrows split throats, steel rang against chain. Men and centaurs fought not side by side, but interwoven, horses charging through gaps men carved, men climbing the backs of centaurs to strike from impossible heights. Chaos became unity. And then the forged demon moved. It bellowed, runes flaring brighter, its chained heart vomiting fire. The air blistered with heat as it rolled forward, dragging its army with it, every step a hammerfall against the valley floor. Dern saw it, and in that instant all sound fell away. The world narrowed to the furnace glow, the chains, the maw that promised annihilation. "This ends with me," he whispered. He turned to Miran. The boy's eyes shone, caught between terror and devotion. Dern placed a hand on his shoulder. "Guard the wall. Guard them all. If I fall, you remember tonight, that stone is more than stone." Before Miran could speak, Dern spurred forward, plunging into the thickest press of orcs. His sword became a comet, sweeping arcs of silver through black flesh. Every strike carried the weight of desperation, of defiance. He carved a path not toward survival, but toward the demon itself. Lyra saw him. She understood. With a scream that split the valley, she rallied her riders. "Protect him. Open the way." Centaurs flung themselves into the orc tide, hoofs crushing bone, arrows piercing eyes. They tore gaps in the sea, bleeding themselves into the soil so Dern could reach the heart. At last he stood before the beast. Its maw glared like the mouth of the world's forge, heat so fierce it seared his lungs. His armor smoked, flesh blistering beneath. Yet he did not waver. He drove his blade into the seam Lyra had pierced earlier. The steel shrieked, bending, breaking, but not before it split a chain. The rune flared, stuttered, then cracked. The demon howled, staggering. Lyra loosed an arrow that struck the same wound. Sparks geysered out. Centaurs and men together hurled torches, oil, fire. The maw shrieked, choking on its own inferno. And Dern, battered, burning, seized a final torch. With both hands he rammed it deep into the demon's throat. The valley exploded. Light swallowed everything. Heat ripped the breath from lungs. Orcs screamed as fire consumed them, their tide breaking under its own weapon's death. When the glare faded, the forged demon was gone. Nothing but twisted slag remained, glowing like the bones of a fallen star. The field was ash and silence. Survivors, man and centaur, stood swaying, weapons slick, eyes wide in disbelief. The horde, leaderless, scattered into the night. But at the heart of the ruin, only one figure knelt, armor blackened, helm split. Commander Dern, still and unmoving. The storm had broken. And the stone had fallen. Dawn came slowly. Not as a triumph, but as a weary promise, seeping through the blackened gorge like water through cracked stone. Smoke drifted in pale ribbons across the valley, carrying the scent of iron, ash, and blood. The cries of the wounded bled into the silence, softer than the storm that had raged hours before. Lyra walked through the ruin, every hoofstep heavy. Around her, riders moved as if in a dream, binding wounds, gathering fallen comrades, pulling arrows from flesh and soil alike. Men stumbled among them, equally broken, equally alive. For the first time, there was no clear line between soldier and centaur. They were simply survivors, bound by scars. At the center of it all, where the forged demon had collapsed into a carcass of twisted metal, a figure knelt in stillness. Commander Dern, helm split, armor seared. His hand still gripped the torch's charred remnant, as though even in death he would not let go of the fire that had ended the beast. Lyra approached slowly, ears flat, throat tight. She had seen many fall in battle, kin, enemies, even leaders. But this was different. Dern had not been her blood, yet in one night he had become something more, proof that stone could move, could break its silence, could choose to ride with storm. Miran was already there, kneeling beside his commander. His young face was streaked with soot, eyes swollen with grief yet burning with defiance. He did not cry aloud, he sat in silence, shoulders squared, a mirror of the man he had followed. Lyra lowered herself onto her knees, bow across her lap, head bowed. She spoke not to Miran, nor to the soldiers who had gathered in a quiet ring, but to the still figure before her. "You rode when you could have hidden. You chose fire when stone alone would not endure. For that, my people will remember you, not as a commander of men, but as one of us." The Centaurs struck their hooves once, a thunderous beat that rolled across the broken valley. The men, uncertain at first, raised their spears in silent salute. Two peoples, divided for generations, bound together by one man's final charge. Miran lifted the helm from Durn's head. Its edges were cracked, scorched, no longer fit for war. Yet he cradled it as though it were holy. "What will you do with it?" Lyra asked softly. The boy's voice was quiet but steady. "Carry it. Until I am ready to wear it." Lyra studied him, seeing not just a boy but a seed. The storm had marked him, and from that scar, something new might grow. Her gaze turned outward, to the blackened plain where the orc horde had fled. The threat was not ended. Armies would return, engines would rise again, fire would lick at stone. Yet something had changed that no army could unmake. Stone had learned to ride. Storm had learned to trust. The people of Helm's Deep would rebuild their walls. The Centaurs would ride the plains again. But never again as strangers. Lyra rose, lifting her bow high into the dawn. "Let this be known," she declared, her voice carrying across stone and ash alike. "Helm's Deep does not stand alone. The storm will answer its call." Her riders stamped hooves in answer, a sound that shook the gorge like a heartbeat. Men lifted their voices, not in cheer but in a solemn vow. Together, the two sounds merged, no longer stone and storm but something greater, an echo of unity. As the sun rose, its first light touched Durn's still figure, gilding his broken armor in gold. For one fleeting instant, he seemed not fallen but eternal, a statue carved of fire and sacrifice. Miran closed his eyes, clutching the cracked helm to his chest. And though his lips did not move, his heart whispered words he knew would never fade. May stone and storm ride together, always. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of hooves across the valley, faint, distant, yet unbroken. Some swore they heard it long after the survivors had returned to the keep, as though the commander's spirit still galloped across the plain, a sentinel of ash and dawn. And in that echo, the fortress of Helm's Deep, scarred, battered, but unyielding, breathed again.